The first rays of dawn stretched across the airport, casting a golden glow over the quiet, cold terminal. At Gate 42, a lone figure waited calmly. No entourage, no designer suit, held no extravagant luggage, no bodyguards flanking him. To most travelers and the untrained eye, he looked like just another African man waiting for his flight. But this was no ordinary man. This was Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso. He preferred to travel the world this way, humble, unassuming, private, and quiet. No cameras, no loud announcements. That's how he moved. He believed in being with the people, blending in, staying grounded. He had just concluded high-stakes negotiations in Europe and America, discussions on gold sovereignty, African resources, reclaiming African stolen wealth, and charting a future free from exploitation. Now all he wanted was to go home. As he approached the American Airlines flight to Ouagadougou, puffed a soft "Good morning" to a janitor sweeping near the gate. The old man smiled back, unaware he had just been greeted by a head of state. As he boarded the flight, he nodded politely to the flight crew and took his seat. Business class, 4A by the window. Calm, humble, no fanfare, no recognition. But just a few rows behind, the storm was already brewing. A director of a major American mining corporation, Richard Holloway, was also headed to Burkina Faso. He was used to VIP treatments and red carpets. He was the embodiment of corporate arrogance. Polished shoes, tailored suit, a gold watch glinting under the lights. When Richard reached the gate and learned that business class was full, he erupted, stood fuming at the gate. His face was red with indignation. "I'm a strategic partner in many African projects," he said arrogantly. To him, that meant rules didn't apply. "I don't think you understand," he hissed to the airline staff. "I'm responsible for half the mining investments in West Africa. Find me a seat." "I don't fly economy." The gate agents exchanged uneasy glances, scrambled, whispering, checking their tablets. Business class was full. But Mr. Richard wasn't used to hearing no. His voice dropped into a cold command. "Make it happen." That's when Laura, a senior flight attendant, was summoned. "Let me handle this," she said coolly. As she entered the cabin, her ears scanned sharply over the passengers like a predator. She landed on the unassuming black man in seat 4A, Ibrahim Traoré. Dark-skinned, simple clothes, no assistance, no sign of power or visible wealth. Her mind made its calculation. She leaned toward another attendant. "Him being here is probably a mistake," she whispered. Approaching Traoré with a practiced smile, she asked, "May I see your boarding pass?" She said, not even with the lowest level of courtesy. Traoré looked up, calm as always. He handed it to her without a flicker of suspicion. She stared at the pass, then back to her colleagues and said, "The seat number is correct." But something inside her didn't sit right in her eyes. "He didn't look like someone who belonged there," she said. Moments later, she returned. Her smile tightened as she inspected the pass again. "I'm sorry, sir. We'll need to move you to economy to accommodate another passenger. We will compensate you." There it was, the insult. Everybody around watched, with eyes well opened, to see if this humiliation would sail through. A silence fell over the row. Traoré raised an eyebrow, his voice measured. "Why me?" he asked. "No reason," Laura replied. "No reason?" Traoré asked again, with curiosity. "Then explain why I'm the one being asked," he countered. "Just a small adjustment for our guest." She said, "A guest more important than me?" Traoré asked with a calm voice. Other passengers glanced over, sensing something wrong, but no one said a word. "No, I would prefer to remain on my seat," Traoré said firmly. She forced a smile again, but her pride was bruised. "Sir, I insist. This is for operational reasons," she lied. But Traoré didn't budge. His eyes, calm, steady, unyielding, met hers. "If it's operational, why am I the only one being asked?" The tension rippled through the cabin. A businessman removes his glasses, lowered his newspaper. A woman paused her typing on her iPad. Still, no one spoke a word. The director still hadn't boarded, yet he was being held at the gate until a seat was arranged. Laura walked quickly to the cockpit, whispered something to the captain, and then returned with a decision. She didn't say a word to Traoré. This time instead, she approached another black man in business class. She was clearly targeting only passengers who looked like they didn't belong, while ignoring white passengers entirely. That was her second mistake. Traoré watched quietly. He wasn't angry. He was listening, absorbing and assessing. A young African engineer was next. Laura now pointed at his seat. "You, sir, we need you to move to economy." The young African engineer was confused. He asked, "Why me?" Laura said nothing, only took his boarding pass. That's when Traoré stood up. "Enough." His voice was quiet, but it cut through the cabin like a blade. "You're making decisions based on skin, not on tickets. That's called discrimination." Laura froze. Passengers were now fully alert. Laura tried to save face. "Sir, please sit down. Don't cause a scene." But her voice faltered. Traoré looked her straight in the eyes for a second. Her breath caught. There was something in his gaze, dignity, quiet power, that rattled her. Yet she still didn't know who she was dealing with. To her, he was just another passenger acting like a troublemaker. At the gate, Richard Holloway was still fuming. When finally escorted on board, Laura greeted him like a royalty. She served him a glass of champagne with reverence. "Why did you keep me so long at the gate?" he asked arrogantly. "We are very, very sorry. We were fixing the seating issue," Laura said softly. "Burkina Faso will be grateful to have me," Richard boasted. "We're bringing them civilization." Laura, the flight attendant, made sure he was comfortable, adjusting his seat, handing him warm towels, and offering him another glass of champagne. The message was clear. You matter. That man does not. The plane moved down the runway and took off into the sky, leaving behind American soil, but carrying with it a moment that would soon shake two nations. Inside the cabin, everything appeared to be normal. Passengers relaxed. The seatbelt signs turned off, but beneath the surface, something powerful was brewing. An invisible storm waiting to burst. Traoré maintained his calmness. He didn't complain. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call anyone or reveal his identity. He just sat quietly, knowing exactly how it would end. Meanwhile, Laura avoided looking at him. Something about his presence unsettled her, but she pushed it aside. Mid-flight, she returned to his seat with a forced smile. "Would you like anything to drink, sir?" He glanced at her. "Water will be fine." She nodded quickly and walked away. No apology, no courtesy, no respect. Few minutes later, she returned with a bottle of water that appeared previously opened. "Thanks," Traoré said as he collected it, but refused to drink it as a silent protest when he observed that the director, on the other hand, was given another type of water and was treated like a king. Laura laughed at the director's jokes, leaned in when he spoke, and asked about his important projects in Africa. He replied arrogantly, "Burkina Faso is lucky to have us. We're bringing order to chaos." Laura nodded in agreement, completely unaware that the very man he was humiliating was sitting just 2 rows away. One woman in the cabin, an African nurse returning home, noticed everything. She shook her head and whispered to her neighbor, "That's our president. They don't even know who they're humiliating." Her neighbor's eyes widened in disbelief, but they said nothing. The president clearly didn't want attention, and no one wanted to break the silence. Hours passed, the lights dimmed, most passengers slept, but Ibrahim Traoré remained awake, reflecting on a lot of things. "This is not an insult on me, but on my people. So this is what my people go through in the hands of people who have no respect for the humanity of African extraction. This must end," he said to himself quietly. As the plane began its descent into Ouagadougou, The mood shifted. The cabin lights flickered on. The captain announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ouagadougou Airport. The local time is 3:15 p.m. and the temperature is 37 degrees Celsius with brilliant sunny weather. We ask that you please remain seated with your seatbelt securely fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off. Please be careful when opening the overhead bins, as items may have shifted during the flight. On behalf of American Airlines and the entire crew, we'd like to thank you for flying with us today. It's been our pleasure having you on board, and we look forward to serving you again soon. We wish you a pleasant stay here or a safe journey to your final destination. Thank you and have a wonderful day." Passengers stretched, fastened their seatbelts, and prepared to land. Laura walked through the aisle with her clipboard, still smiling at the director and ignoring Ibrahim Traoré completely. Outside, the view was breathtaking. Golden sun over red soil as the aircraft glided down. But what no one inside the plane could see just yet was the growing convoy waiting at the airport. Passengers peered out the windows. A full military presidential escort waited. Rows of black SUVs, military trucks, uniformed guards and ministers standing at attention on the blazing tarmac. Inside the cabin, whispers started spreading, only softly at first. "I see soldiers. Are we landing into a war zone?" one foreign passenger asked nervously. "Oh no, that's military protocol." Another replied, "Maybe someone important is arriving." Richard straightened his tie, smirked. "Obviously, they're here for me." He chuckled to Laura. She laughed along with him. She was already preparing to walk him out ahead of the other passengers. She had even planned to personally escort him to the terminal. But the plane had barely stopped rolling when the entire atmosphere changed. Out the window, the passengers saw presidential guards in uniform lined up sharply, weapons at their sides, standing in full attention. Behind them stood Burkina Faso's top ministers, the Minister of Defense, the Foreign Minister, even the head of security, all waiting in the heat, unmoving. But as soon as the wheels touched down, the doors opened. Laura peeped out the window and gasped. "What is this?" she whispered. The director stood up proudly, smoothing his suit. "Clearly this is for me. I told you I'm involved in big projects here." But before anyone could even step off the plane, a tall officer in a black beret boarded the aircraft. His boots echoed on the floor as he walked slowly down the aisle, scanning every face. He stopped at seat 4A and snapped a flawless salute. "Mr. President, welcome home." The cabin fell into stunned silence. Laura's hands trembled. You could hear Laura's sharp intake of breath. Richard's smirk faded. Slowly, gracefully, Traoré stood up. No anger, no gloating, no word spoken. He gave Richard the briefest nod, a man who no longer needed words. Another officer stepped in. "We have instructions," he said coldly, looking at Laura and the director. "You two will come with us immediately." Laura's face crumbled. "Wait, what?" Laura whispered. "Why, you are being detained for questioning," the officer replied, sharply. "You have publicly disrespected and humiliated the head of state on national soil. That is a serious offense." Richard sputtered, I didn't know." Laura sobbed. "I didn't know." Shried to laugh, nervously looking around. No, this has to be a mistake. He was doing my job, but no one listened." Traoré stepped off the plane and was immediately met by his people, his guards, his ministers, and a cheering crowd. Cameras clicked and flashed. The nation's leader had returned, but this time everyone knew the truth. He had walked among them as a regular man, and those who had judged him by appearance would now face consequences. Back on the aircraft, Laura and the director were both being led away in handcuffs. Passengers watched in disbelief as they disappeared down the steps. Heads lowered, their arrogance crushed, and that was only the beginning. The tarmac was blazing under the Burkina Faso sun, but all eyes were on the two people being escorted away in handcuffs. Laura, the American Airlines flight attendant, and the high-powered American mining corporation director gone were their smug smiles. Gone was the arrogance. In its place, panic, confusion, and disbelief. They were led into two separate black vehicles, surrounded by elite presidential guards. No one said a word to them, not even the officers. The silence was louder than any shouting. It was the silence of power being reclaimed, of dignity being defended. Inside the terminal, President Ibrahim Traoré stood before a small press gathering. He spoke calmly, without anger, but his words were sharp and unforgettable. In Burkina Faso, we don't look at a man's skin to measure his worth. We don't bow to money or old colonial habits. Here we respect dignity, humanity, and our people. That is the new Africa. In the new Africa, Africa will no longer be a beggar. So we respect dignity and character. This is not a colony. This is a sovereign land. And here, every human being is entitled to dignity. And today, the world has seen what happens when you mistake humility for weakness. The people roared, "This is our president!" The world took notice. Social media exploded. Videos of the arrest went viral. Hashtags like Respect Africa and hashtag New Africa Rising, hashtag Traoré the Lion trended globally. At the Ministry of Justice, Laura and the director were formally charged with public insult and discrimination toward the head of state, disrespect on Burkina Faso soil, abuse of power, and attempted intimidation. The American embassy tried to intervene. Phone calls were made, diplomatic requests poured in, but Traoré gave a clear response. This is a sovereign nation. They will face justice just like anyone else. Meanwhile, American Airlines scrambled to control the damage. The airline issued a public statement within 24 hours. A clumsy apology filled with corporate language with empty regret, but it wasn't enough. Burkinabe citizens began calling for a boycott of American products. Other African countries joined in. Laura is now locked in a detention center outside Ouagadougou. She broke down in tears during questioning. "I didn't know who he was," she sobbed. "I was just following procedures." The investigator looked at her coldly. "You didn't need to know who he was. You just needed to treat him like a human being." The director is now facing potential legal action in both Burkina Faso and America. His influence, once so vast, crumbled like sand. He tried to use his influence to escape, but the court made a powerful ruling. No immunity, no special treatment, no exceptions. Let justice be equal. Traoré never gloated. He never once mocked them. He simply returned to the presidential palace and continued his work, rebuilding critical infrastructure, building schools, securing mines, strengthening the military, defending the land, and empowering his people. For the first time in centuries, an African leader had struck back, not with violence, but with an unshakable principle, and the world would never forget it. But that moment on the plane became legend, and across Africa, young people repeated the story of the quiet man in seat 4A, the flight that humbled the arrogant, a flight attendant with prejudice, a director blinded by pride, a landing that changed everything, and the president who reminded the world that Africa is awake, and it will no longer kneel. And as the sun set over Ouagadougou, a new generation whispered, "This is the Africa we were promised." And for the first time in history, it was. Let me know what you think of Ibrahim Traoré. What is one that stood out for you about Ibrahim Traoré? Do you think all African presidents should be like him? Let me know in the comment section. Please subscribe for more interesting videos like this. Thank you for watching.